Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
It's a topic that is talked about each month in a number of magazines, raising and even more challenging how to discipline your child. In our present high-stress world, parenting still remains a high-pressured job, and the question remains, who do parents set, how do parents set responsible boundaries and help their child set and achieve personal goals? Hello, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, co-pastor of Banal Full Community Church and your host for today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Today, 4 local counselors join us for a frank discussion of parenting. Most are parents themselves, and they will help us focus on how to raise children safely, morally, and ethically in the 1990s. Joining us are Glenna Chappell and Michael Bishop, marriage and family counselors with Austin Family Institute, Janessa Stirrup, an individual and family therapist with Austin Psychotherapy Group, and Marjorie Johnson, who is a school counselor for Pleasant Hill Elementary School. Welcome to you all. I'm really glad you're here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today. We are talking today about discipline primarily, but thinking more about how discipline helps bring children up, someone said, healthy, happy, and whole. So let's start with just a definition of what we mean by discipline, because I think people may mean different things by that. You want to start us off, Glenna?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of punishment when they think of discipline. And to me, it's the process by which we teach our children to be responsible for themselves. We provide structure, rules, limits, guidance for them, and then they internalize those and learn how to do that themselves as they become adults.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that?
Well, I think of discipline as teaching. And if you can look back and see how well you've disciplined by what the child has learned, by what you've done. So this, to me, is a good guide for a parent to look back and see what has the kid learned from this particular thing that we did. If he's learned something good, that's good.
You know, in working with children and working with families, I like to think of it also as guidelines. And these, you know, we all have to operate within certain guidelines. And the kids have a level of guidelines, and parents have a level of guidelines. And we function within that. And that's how I see discipline. And working with adolescents, I think sometimes that sets well with them if they know that we all have to operate in that, and nobody is excluded. So.
Yeah, I think that's true, that the parent also is being disciplined in some sense.
That's right. That's
I agree with all of the definitions, and I would add to it that it hopes that in disciplining children that it would be instruction and teaching so that they would get to a point to make decisions on their own, and it brings out a maturity in them, that they would know getting into a situation that was similar in the past, and they understood the discipline, and they made a decision, the appropriate decision that would affect their behavior and affect the response of the parent.
Now, all of us have certainly been children at some point, and therefore disciplined from that spectrum, and most of us are parents. So I'm just going to let you identify yourself either as child, parent, or just child. So start over here, Janessa, and tell us your kind of working with this discipline.
I'm not a parent, but have had years and years of experience in working with children, and I find myself oftentimes using a point of reference as my own, you know, upbringing from my childhood. And what I have to constantly remember is what was positive and what was not about that experience, and then make some judgment about what I'm doing with the children, and is that going to make sense to them. And, you know, the thing I want to stress so much is with parents, there is not a book that tells you or teaches you the perfect way to do it. So we're not talking about perfection, but we're talking about using our own experiences and then making some judgments about whether that's appropriate or not in working with kids. And that's how I, you know, like to look at it, with my own family members as well as the children I work with.
Good.
Well, I was a child a very long time ago, but I do remember it well. I was a parent. I have 2 daughters, and I now am a grandparent. I'd be glad to show you pictures if you want. But I've also been working with children and with parents now for about 25 years in the school system, and am continually learning new things about the difficulties of raising children today as opposed to raising children in my day. And so I think I stay pretty well up on what's happening with parents and with what's happening from a child's point of view.
Well, I'm a child and I am a parent, and I think that one of the things that I see in the work that I do is what exactly is going on in the family dynamics, because so often the child is the one who is taking on the collective symptom and behavior of that family and acts that out. And sometimes that's positive behavior and sometimes it's negative behavior.
Good.
And I'm both. I'm a child. And part of the reason I got into my profession is that we had a very difficult time in my family when I was an adolescent. My family was very good at providing safety and structure for little kids and not very good at letting kids become individuals and get more independent as they got older. So one of my burning passions is working with children and teenagers. You know, I think a lot of us get into this to try to heal our own wounds. And I have twin daughters who are 24. So I'm a survivor of adolescence, and we made our own mistakes and muddled through it. And I was a single parent, which was somewhat different from how I grew up. So I have a varied perspective. I've been working with families for about 16 years now. See a lot of families, and I agree with you. I think a lot of times when you see a child who's having a difficulty, that they're acting out a difficulty in the family, they're trying to give a cry for help for a distressed family. Do you look beyond just what that child is doing and into the family relationships?
I think it's hard for parents to do that. I will say, as kind of outside of, I'm not really outside of the profession, so that's not really fair, but I know as a pastor, when I'm dealing with families and one child may be acting out, and I say to the families, well, what is going on in the house that is such distress for this person? And it's always, oh, nothing is going on. Then when you keep pushing, you find out dad's out of a job, mom can't get a better paying job, big brother is in jail. I mean, you know, they pick a number of different things, and then helping people see that is, I think, probably one of the big things that the professionals have to do, is helping people see, become aware that it's not just a child issue, this whole issue of discipline. I wanted to go back to what Margie said about difficulty of parenting in the 90s as opposed to in the 50s or 60s. Would you, I don't know if everybody would agree with that, but could you say more about what you're...
I would.
I just, I think all of you, when I work with families, you already know this, but I see this as an increasingly difficult field every year. I think we get children that are more disturbed. I think we have children that are products of the drug culture, of the unemployment situation, of the moving around, of the Saudi war, or the Persian Gulf War, divorce. Parents come in and say to me, we were divorced now about 3 years ago, but it never has bothered my child. It's bothered that child. And to help the parent see what kinds of things a child feels about this, and as well as helping the child, is kind of where I am. And in the school, I have access to parents. They don't have to necessarily come in. I can call them in and say, please come talk to me about your child, so that we can actually do some one-on-one work with parents. I think it is more difficult. I think the conflicts that are going on in society are evident in every family.
I think the other piece to that is in the 50s, if you look back, we have gone from a period of children having no rights, no say-so. You do it because I say you do it, to children having all the rights and they then feeling they have the right to dictate. And somewhere in the middle, I think, is where we get real confused. And I like to talk with families when I see them is, you know, we don't operate under what I call the windshield effect with kids. You know, it's not all or nothing. Where in the middle can we establish some common ground about what's going to happen? Because I think kids now feel, and everybody's told them, that they have rights, and boy, they're ready in a moment's notice to exercise them, not always appropriately.
They have a real sense of entitlement to material possessions, to rights, to privileges, and not a real strong sense a lot of times of responsibility that goes with that. I think some of that is windshield wiper, that I deal with a lot of parents who did without many things when they were kids, so they want their kids to have everything, or they had to do all the chores so their kids don't do any chores. Well, one of the ways that children become accustomed to doing routine chores and being valuable members of families is helping out with the daily routine. And so if they don't do that, while the parent's attitude is, I'm giving you this gift of leisure, what it instills in the kid is a very different set of values. And you're right, Marjorie, that the people who were born, well, in my generation, I'm 42, and I think we were one of the last generations to experience families where only one parent worked and married families. Because certainly my children experienced a family where both their parents worked and we were divorced. And the people, my kids are 24, that age and younger, those people have experienced a huge rate of divorce, single parenting, parental availability very limited by the demands on parents having to make a living, and just the high stress of our culture. So it's different.
Well, I want to push another issue, and maybe, Michael, we can drag you in at this point, is the whole issue of common cultural expectations, societal expectations of children and parents. It seems to me that there are very few people in my neighborhood with my same values for raising my kids. Not that there aren't any, you know what I'm saying? But there isn't. When I was growing up, say about when I was growing up, and I'm 30-something. Bold you are.
I noticed that.
Right? Wasn't that bold? My parents could count on, my mother could depend on her neighbors reinforcing her values for me. She could depend on if I was doing something. I knew if I did something, it would beat me home. I mean, someone had told my mother long before I got there. So there was some sense in which the community was and the church was very much a part of my having boundaries and responsibility. I was not just responsible to the Bridgman household. I had some responsibility to this whole community to be responsible. And I don't have that sense personally now. Michael, you want to talk about that? Maybe I'm pontificating. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think that I had the same experience that you're talking about as I was growing up as a child. And the Pony Express or the telephone lines were always burning. I never could beat it home. But in the situation, I was just thinking about my own, everyone on the block where I live works. And so it's not like a situation if I'm at home or if my wife is at home, my daughter's out playing, that someone is going to enforce our values, whether we have the same values or not, because generally they're not there. And so it's a very fragmented experience. But then you run into the situation, if people were at home, we have such a much more of a diverse system within our life and culture now. Someone may not echo the same values that I have. Someone may choose to punish my child severely for something that I may want to handle in a completely different way. And so there's not the same kind of entrustment that there has been in generations past.
Because there's not this consensus.
There was a common, and I grew up in that era, and I mean there was the networking of, it didn't matter whether you did, whatever you did was at school, at church, or wherever, and you know, telephones were available and so forth, and parents worked. I mean, both my parents worked. But before I could get home and before I could conjure up my version of the story, my mother at work already knew whatever was going on. The community as a whole, whether it was that neighborhood or whether it was that church or whether it was the school, there was a common understanding of children and expectations. So, you know, the values were common throughout. Now we're so mobile in terms of moving around. We've lost that.
My school is multi-ethnic, and I find that different parents get upset about different things. And they will call me to tell on someone else's child and want me to fix that. So I try to smooth it over with children as much as I can, trying to help children solve the problems between them. There's no way that I can move into the neighborhood and help that, but I do find that expectations are different in different ethnic groups.
Well, I think the expectations are different with ethnic groups. Even within the same race, there is going to be different kinds of experiences. But also because we have a different generation now that we're raising, and we have different expectations based on just how we want to relate to children. It used to be, don't say anything, don't act out, just be quiet. And now we're much freer at letting children express themselves, but still we want them to express only what we believe to be politically correct or socially correct, you know. And I think that gets a child caught in a double bind, because you may say on one experience you can be this way, but then we take them to another social experience. No, you cannot be that way. And how is a 6, 7, 8 to 12-year-old going to be able to figure out what is correct in each given situation that I'm involved in?
We have to take some of that, I think, also into our own hands. That, you know, when my daughters were teenagers, I moved into a new town, and I knew that the rules that my family had were very, very strict, ridiculously strict when I was an adolescent. And so I called a lot of other parents and asked dumb questions like, what time does your kid have to be in? And, you know, where do you think it's okay for kids to go in this town? Just called people that were parents of kids the same age to find out, and I didn't get consensus, but I got some idea of what the windshield wiper, how far the range of the windshield, like what was the outer limit, what was the inside limit, and then I tried to walk some kind of middle ground with them. And they didn't like a lot of it, and some of it was okay, but I think we have to not be afraid to have our kids mad at us because we make a decision they don't like.
Well, that was a good piece you just gave, Glenna, on checking with other parents. I mean, not being isolated as parents in the disciplining process, because I think that that's easy to do. But just to, even just in your general vicinity, even with the school counselor, which I will admit to having done last year quite a bit, because we transitioned just from Central Austin to South Austin, and my oldest child just thought that was the worst thing in the world you could possibly do to a 10-year-old. He may have been right. I mean, but it had to be done, so we all had to try to figure out how to get through that transition. I mean, he's an entirely different child this year. You know, and I credit a lot of that to the community of the school and the community of the church of which we are a part. So having some sense that I was not out there by myself, that other people really understood I was not abusing my child, you know, because there is this sense in society now, everything I do, I'm judging harshly as a parent. That, oh God, am I being abusive now? You know, I think parents go through that.
You know, kids today really take advantage, I think, sometimes of that isolation of parents, because they will come home and they say, well, everybody else's parents let them do that. You know, I just think you're being awful. You know, you're back in the Stone Age, you know. And of course, then the parent, if they don't have that kind of support or connection with other parents, will say, well, maybe, you know, I'm being too harsh, or maybe I'm being, you know, out in left field, so I'll do it. Only to find out that's not the norm.
Yeah.
I tried that, but I couldn't get away with it. And kids get away with it more now.
They get away with it,
They can even accuse a parent of child abuse, and they can really do that sometimes. And it's kind of a trick to know exactly. I think parents need to know what is considered child abuse. I think it's unfair for us not to tell them what DHS considers child abuse, that if you've hit a kid so hard that there's a bruise, then that has to be reported. They need to know that ahead of time. It seems only fair they know those rules.
It's another change in our culture, because I think certainly the way I was disciplined, and with a lot of the parents I deal with, the way they were disciplined now is abusive behavior. Standards have changed radically. And so parents are coming in saying, you know, my dad whipped me once a week at least, and it helped me out. It made me a better person. But they turn around and apply the same form of, quote, discipline or punishment to their children, and they get called by DHS. So we need to make the information available to parents.
With that, let's turn a corner, because we've kind of talked about what the culture looks like. And I don't want to idealize the good old days, because we can do that. There are a lot of stuff about the days before that we really wouldn't want to perpetrate on our children. But what do we as parents, as church members, as community members, as concerned citizens do to kind of upbuild the issue of discipline? And what is discipline? How do we do it? I mean, I know we've kind of defined it, but I mean, give me some specifics. What might be called a disciplinary action? Yeah, I guess we'll start with toddlers and maybe move up the ladder, because I think obviously it's very different raising a 2-year-old than a
I think before we do that, we have to, I think a lot of people, they seem to put together discipline and punishment. And I think those are two different things. And I think that we have to make sure that before we even go farther than up the ladder, so to speak, that we say that there is discipline and that there is punishment.
Well, you're saying it, so say more about it, Michael.
Thank you very much. And I'll take comments from anybody else. Well, as we go back to our definition of discipline, the way I understood that we were providing it to be instruction, to be guidance, to help them make decisions. And punishment, a lot of times, in my opinion, is where it is just a direct response to some kind of behavior. I tend to put spanking or whipping, whatever you want to call that, in the area of punishment. I don't know what that teaches.
Power.
It teaches power. Well,
I'm bigger than you are.
It teaches a metaphorical thing, but not just something literal. I don't know that the child is saying, oh, well, I can understand exactly why I got spanked because it means da-da-da-da. But I think that when we get into issues of punishment, I think that that's mainly, you're responding to the specific behavior, but there's nothing there that helps that child understand exactly what the response was, why we're doing this, what this is all about. I think it gives the parent relief if they're angry, but I don't think it does anything for the child, but maybe wounds the child in some way, or gets them to cry, and then we somehow think crying is repentant behavior.
Well, now see, Michael, you just put yourself on the hot seat, because I'm going to tell that you're also an ordained minister, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. There are biblical mandates for spanking and for, I mean, the scripture that I remember having quoted to me by someone was, do not spare for their crying. You shall beat the child with a rod, and do not spare for their crying, because you drive something from them. I can't even remember the rest of it. But talk about that, because
you're the pastor.
Right. Well, I am the pastor, but there are people for whom, I mean, the Bible is central to certainly several, I mean, not just Christian faith, but other people who depend on there being some stability about the law, if you want to say that. How do you respond to that? Well, I know how I respond as a pastor. I'm really asking you as counselor and ordained minister, how do you respond to people who say, here it is in the Bible?
Well, I think that one of the things that I want us to consider on that is, first of all, I don't believe, my opinion, my interpretation is I don't believe that there is a systematic biblical plan for rearing children. I think there are some theological considerations. There are references in the scripture that say, you know, what is it, the one in Proverbs, spare the rod, you know. And I think that we have to look at the scripture's written in a different cultural context. It's also written many years ago. And a lot of people say, well, the Bible is the same today. Well, that's true. It's from what we know, it's printed the same way. But I think that what we have to look at is that there are other references in Scripture that would contradict that. I believe that it says, you know, don't provoke your child to anger. You know, and I think I would rather look at the theological concepts, parenting with grace, giving your child a sense of grace, helping a child understand redemption, helping a child understand forgiveness.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Because I think those things are greater lessons than just say, I'm going to whip you because the Bible says X, Y, Z.
All right. We are almost out of time, and you know we are not halfway through where we want to go. But I do want to give you some time to, I think that's a good response, by the way, Michael. That is what I say to people, that there's more in the Bible than beat your child. But tell me as a parent, just some simple things I can do. One of the things I do as a parent is time out. I mean, I will send a child
For you
and myself. Both. I will say to my children sometimes, I am too angry to respond to this right now. Let me have some time. Or I will say, you are too out of control. Go to a corner until you can get some control, and then we will talk. So things like that. I know that's right because I have good, I have good friends who say, yes, that's right. But other things that parents can do. Can you think of other things?
I think you get what you give. That if you want respectful behavior from your child, then you behave respectfully toward your child. If you want honesty, then you give the child honesty. If you want them to do what you do, then do what you want them to do. I mean, it's really a pretty simple proposition. Discipline is firm, discipline is friendly, discipline is not applied in anger. It's logical.
It's reasonable.
It's
Let
reasonable.
them experience the consequences of their decisions.
I heard a person say one time in a workshop, they said, parents probably blow their alternatives verbally more than anything.
Absolutely.
Because they say what they can't really come up with.
I wish that parents would not feel like they have to have the last word. That they can walk off from something and they can still win.
Let somebody be a grown-up around.
Somebody can be a grown-up.
Or as a friend of mine said one time, don't tell your child that if they run out in the street, they're going to get run over by a truck, because it won't happen. We're running out of time. And I want to thank Glenna Chappell and Michael Bishop, Jeanette Sister, and Marjorie Johnson for your being here. This has been a great discussion. On behalf of Austin Faith Dialogue, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, thanking you for watching and inviting you to join us next week, this same time. Peace to you.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-76